I see the walls, then see them fall. We break through them all. I see you crawl, now you stand tall. Grow and grow till tall.
Welcome to Planet Earth. It has been changing recently. Its politics and people have been dealing with a problem called climate change. In the past, the Earth has gone through cycles of extreme cold and extreme hot temperatures. The issue now is the rate at which the Earth is warming up and asking the question, is it due to human activity? A country that is greatly impacted by this issue of climate change is Colombia. Its people are put in harm's way by the consequences of climate change and need help. That is where we, the Green Health Initiative, come in. To begin with, we will show the vulnerabilities and the opportunities that Colombia faces due to climate change.
Colombia is the world's third most vulnerable country to climate change because of its diverse regions of land. With global warming and the climate changing, Colombia faces many struggles that can harm the whole country. One vulnerability that can affect the coastal areas of Colombia is rising sea levels due to climate changes. This could potentially submerge parts of the city on the coast, destroying homes and jobs. This would affect the economy of Colombia by hurting the tourism industry as well as jobs of citizens of the country. The environment would also be changed by rising sea levels. Another hazard to Colombia caused by global warming is increased temperatures. Warmer weather causes malaria and dengue fever to spread more quickly, especially in the Andes Mountains region of Colombia. This negatively affects the culture, economy, and politics of Colombia by causing people to get sick and potentially wiping out whole regions. Then, people would be unable to work or keep the economy going, and the government would have to spend time and energy on preventing the disease from spreading while they could be focusing on other things. Changes in annual rainfall due to climate change affects Colombia in different ways due to its different regions. In the Andes Mountains region, for instance, more rainfall causes landslides and flooding, which negatively affects the economy by destroying crops and livestock, the environment by changing the land, and society by affecting 2.96 million people in 2011. In some regions, however, decreased rainfall occurs due to climate change. This impacts water distribution, which harms the economy and people's livelihood. Climate change also causes drastic changes in seasons, which is causing mudslides in the city of Medellin, where 2.4 million people live. These mudslides can destroy land and decrease water quality, destroy homes of people in and around the city, and destroy businesses in the city. Extreme rains due to climate change can cause greater soil erosion, especially when deforestation is occurring as well. Runoff from rain affects agricultural fields and cities. Deforestation and soil erosion affect natural resources and crops that many people are dependent on in Colombia. This is an opportunity for the government to intervene and attempt to stop human-induced damage that, when partnered with climate change, is detrimental to the country's agricultural resources.
Vulnerability 6. Increasing rate of deforestation due to pre-existing deforestation paired with climate change. Some 45% of 2014's deforestation occurred in the Amazon's IDEM fund, while another 24% was in the Andes regions. For the sensitive, deforestation allows more runoff of flows into streams, evaluating river levels and subjecting downstairs villages, cities, and agricultural fields to flooding. Colombia's economic system mostly relied on agriculture and natural resources, but the increasing rates of deforestation have negative impact of this. The forests are also inhabited by Colombian indigenous and much of these black populations who secure their livelihoods through sustainable means. Deforestation and human encroachment has begun to erode social and economic structure for those communities. And now is vulnerability 7. Severe droughts affect farmers in tin of growing plants such as coffee bean and rice. The drought affects many farmers and even the country of Colombia itself, as coffee beans from Colombia are considered one of the world's most prized coffee beans. This will affect farmers and the state of Colombia. And now for the sensitive, the severe drought are destroying the regions. The change ring is disrupting the stable tropical systems where many farmers plant their crop. The drought are affecting the productions of crops such as rice and coffee. Coffee is one of Colombia's most important exports and provides large sums of monies to the country, and so without it the countries will be the worst economic states. This loss of crop affects many farmers as it is their only means of livelihood. It affects years of working of the farm and put farmers in total despair. And now is opportunity one. Ecological change, global warming crisis, exposure, opportunities for Colombia to implement energy adaptations across the country, prospect, economic dimensions. Developing energy-related research create more jobs. Social dimension. Increase social awareness of climate change through implementing energy adaptations. Political dimension. Stronger governments by increase the political power of governments institutions that deal with energy adaptations and has underlying climate change as one of the main challenges of the country. Opportunity to ecological change, increasing level in CO2, exposure, raising level of CO2 may cause greener rainforests and enhance the plant growth in the Amazon, which include the South Colombia Department of Amazons, Caquetas, Guinea, Guvia, Putumayo, and the Vapors. Prospect. Economic dimensions. Enhanced plans may lead to new resources being used for Colombia economic. Ecological dimensions. Increasing plant growth in the Amazons rainforest may help certain ecosystems to thrive. Political dimensions. Having positions increase certain plants' growth in the Amazons due to raising CO2 levels may impact future politics. Opportunity 3. Ecological change, warmer temperature, exposure, Medellin, which is the cities in Colombia. Prospect, economic dimensions, retirements, destinations, economic is stimulated by population's increase. Cultural dimensions. More people are exposed to the Colombian cultures and lead to cultures exchange. Political dimensions. More people are impacted by political decisions.
The coastal land of Colombia was founded in 1499 by the Spanish and was followed by Spanish occupation for the next 300 years. During this period, many natives lived in the Andes. They were indigenous groups that ranged from agricultural chiefdoms to tropical farm villages and nomadic hunter-gatherer groups. The Spanish forced them into slavery. This, combined with diseases brought by the conquistadors, led many natives to death. The Spanish also deprived Colombia of its gold and natural resources. During this period, the Colombians and the Spanish contributed very little to global climate change. Colombia finally gained independence from Spanish rule in 1810. During Industrial Revolution, the country was in turmoil after Simon Bolivar defeated the Spanish in 1819. Ever since then, the country has had relatively few times of peace and a lot of political instability, a reason that contributed to its falling behind in advancement. Furthermore, Colombia is the world's third most vulnerable country to climate change. It is one of the most vulnerable due to its large coastal marine and mountain ecosystems that provide direct benefits to its population. The people's dependence on the land means any harm to the ecosystem harms their livelihood. All of these factors contribute to the fact that Colombia could not develop its own technology or use its own resources early on, and now it is more susceptible to global warming. Colombia's oil history began in 1918 and reached its golden era at the end of the 1980s. Between 1918 and 1969, technological innovation increased the need for more natural resources and exploratory activity. The discovery of oil fields between 1970 and 1994 placed Colombia as one of the most important oil producers. In 2007, natural gas production began to exceed consumption, which allowed for exports. Presently, Colombia is South America's largest coal producer. It is the region's third largest oil producer after Venezuela and Brazil. In 2015, it was the fifth largest coal exporter in the world, exporting 370,000 barrels per day of crude oil to the U.S. Oil consumption accounted for 37% of total consumption, followed by hydroelectric at 26%, natural gas at 25%, coal at 11%, and other renewables at less than 1%. Colombia is ranked 48th in the world for overall emissions. Deforestation became a huge problem in Colombia when Plan Pacifico went into action in 1984. This was a plan to raise revenue to develop the country. The plan included the exploitation of rainforests for extraction of natural resources for exporting. Japan directly funded these ambitious infrastructure projects to facilitate trade. The illegal production of coca is a large contributor to the deforestation in Colombia, accounting for 25% of the country's yearly deforestation. Colombia accounts for 40% of the world coca market. In the early 1990s, the Colombian drug cartels produced and exported 500 to 800 tons of cocaine a year, shipping not only to the U.S., but also to Europe and Asia. Each hectare of coca requires the destruction of 2.5 hectares of the local ecosystem. The Colombian government is trying to eradicate it by U.S.-funded aerial herbicide spraying. However, for every hectare of forest sprayed, another is lost due to herbicide drift and another due to additional clearing to replace the destroyed coca. Cattle ranching is another problem in Colombia. Between 2005 and 2010, 57% of deforested land was converted into grasslands for grazing. The National Cattle Ranchers Association set a goal of reducing land area dedicated to cattle by 10 million hectares by 2019, while still increasing the overall number of cattle. In the late 2000s, gold mining destroyed nearly 20,000 hectares of rainforest. Mercury used in this mining process pollutes the water. The impact of all these forestry practices takes a toll on the rainforest. The average carbon stock in South American rainforests is 194.6 tons per hectare. Deforestation releases the carbon dioxide sequestered in the living biomass. These practices result in loss of biodiversity, erosion of riverbanks, and destruction to aquatic life. The dominant lifestyles of people living in both urban and rural areas. The majority of the population, 36 million people, live in the Andes and coastal regions due to agricultural and natural resources. 26.9% of urban population is in poverty. The lowest 10% of Colombians earned $1.09 in 2013, while the highest 10% earned $41.94. Their capacity to adapt is currently quite low, as there are extreme water shortages and rising sea levels. 60% of Colombia is grasslands or the Amazon region. 42.8% of the population living in these areas are in poverty. Their capacity to adapt is quite low as well, as the people living in rural regions do not have the resources or money to adapt. The people in both urban and rural areas would be better suited to adapt if there is government involvement to lower CO2 emissions. Climate change effects on vulnerable populations. Women. Women in Colombia depend directly on their environmental livelihood as the only source for their subsistence. Illiteracy and poor knowledge of Spanish prevents them from getting adequate information on climate change consequence mitigation and disaster prevention measures. Indigenous women also suffer disproportionate displacement caused by internal armed conflict. Poor people. Colombia is at high risk from climate change impacts. The majority of poor population lives in the elevated Andes region, where water shortages and land instability are already a reality, and on the coast, where the increase in sea level and floods can affect key human settlements and economic activities. Furthermore, the country has a high incidence of extreme events with growing emergencies associated with climate conditions. Indigenous peoples. The rivers are being highly affected by climate change. Disappearing species and severe floods and droughts are changing living conditions and threatening survival. Minorities tend to live in places that are the worst hit by the impacts of climate change, and their poverty exacerbates their vulnerability. Indigenous people are some of the most isolated and land-dependent people, and so any damage to the land and rivers has a huge impact on their lives. Some of the indigenous people include the Sikunai people, the Kogi, and the Kamensta. Dairy farmers in Colombia are always affected by a weather pattern called El Niño, which alters global patterns. The global pattern now causes droughts for a long period of time and causes cattle to die and crops to be hit due to a lack of rain. Farmers are at a much greater risk of losing much of their sustenance and well-being than before. Children. As escalating droughts and flooding continue to degrade food production, children bear the greatest burden of hunger and malnutrition. Increasing temperatures, along with water scarcity and air pollution, leaves children at a high risk of contracting waterborne diseases and dangerous respiratory conditions. Treatment. Colombia has already become a pioneer in the subject of climate change. The country shows goodwill and ambition to tackle a problem that not only spans across borders, but affects humanity as a whole. One of the vulnerable populations that is helped considerably by Colombia's climate change adaptations are the farmers. The government is investing in smarter agricultural techniques, and one farmer managed to improve the cattle genetics thanks to an expert assessment, and now has cows that are adapted to the tropical climate that provide an average of 8 liters a day. These smarter adaptations will greatly help farmers adapt to climate change. An indigenous population that is affected by climate change adaptations is the Sikunai. The Sikunai live deep in the forest and therefore are affected by programs such as the RED and carbon credits. The Sikunai dealt with a company called Mediamos, which at the end of the day harmed them as the company abused the idea of carbon credits. This resulted in an agreement between them that no one may cut down a tree now, not even for a new house or for fuel for cooking. This will without a doubt hurt a community that lives deep in a forest, and it is an example of how not every climate change adaptation helps a vulnerable population. There are both good and bad examples of how vulnerable populations are affected by adaptation measures. Adaptation measures will never be perfect, so it is imperative that the people of Colombia continue to work towards ideal measures that would benefit all. The first trade-off to help stop climate change in Colombia would be stopping deforestation. Stopping deforestation would be a good way to combat climate change, as forests take in a large portion of carbon dioxide, the most prevalent greenhouse gas. However, stopping deforestation might cause a decline in economy due to a decrease in coffee and oil production. This will hurt many producers, and people may lose jobs and means of income. This makes it so it is not something that can be stopped very quickly. The second trade-off is to use more renewable energy. This would help Colombia become more eco-friendly and decrease their carbon footprint, but it would cause a decline in the economy as Colombia is the third largest producer of oil in the region. This may lead to a loss of GDP and of jobs. The third trade-off is to plant more trees. This will combat climate change, but planting more trees is labor-intensive, takes time, and would take a long time to have any impact. The fourth trade-off is to designate a greenbelt. A greenbelt is a ring of underdeveloped natural space designed to limit territorial growth. This stops expansion of cities, which could provide houses for many people and possible jobs. The last trade-off is to increase awareness of climate change. This would keep people informed on how to deal with droughts and what to do in case of floods and prevent damage. However, it is far too difficult to educate everyone. It would cost a large amount of money, and success might not be too prevalent.
Colombia recognizes that climate change risks need to be identified and faced if the country is going to sustain their current greenhouse gas emission rate. After La Niña occurred in 2010 and 2011, Colombia created many policies regarding climate change, including the Colombian Lower Carbon Development Strategy and National Adaptation Plan for Climate Change. Colombia's government also created the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, the National Planning Department, and the Institute for Hydrology, Meteorology, and Environmental Studies. More recently, in 2014, Colombia created a plan called National Climate Change Policy, which focuses on resilience and emitting less carbon. Colombia wants to increase the participation at local level for territories to create and plan their own climate change strategies. Next, we are going to look into the Colombia involvements in UNFCCC. In 1995, Colombia ratified Kyoto Protocol, and in 1999, it adopted Clean Development Mechanism. During the next 20 years, Colombia introduced the Low Carbon Development Strategy, national strategy for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, National Development Plan, and Climate Change National Adaptation Plan. Moving forward to 5 major instances of involvement, the first instance that we are going to look at is that Colombia's government published a document entitled Institutional Strategy to articulate climate change policies and action in Colombia. This document aimed to create an entirely new institutional framework under which the DMP has climate change authority. It allowed the National Planning Department to coordinate the Minister of Environment, Agriculture, Finance, Mines and Energy, Transportation, Foreign Relations, and Social Protection. Having this document provides an example for other countries in UNFCCC on how to set up policies to combat climate change that could help their own countries. The second major instance of Colombia involvement is the Colombia Low Carbon Development Strategy. The CLCDS is a national program that includes both short and long-term goals. It aims to reduce greenhouse gas emission while national economic growth through programs and policies may help to maximize the efficiency of carbon emissions in the main sectors of the Colombian economy, and promoting national social and economic development at the same time. Under the Paris Agreement, Colombia commits to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 20%. The next major instance is the national strategy to reduce deforestation and forest degradation. It is a program embedded within UNFCCC. It provides financial incentives to governments and local communities to reduce deforestation practices and in turn decrease emission. This program analyzed the cause of deforestation in Colombia and provides support in creating mechanisms for implementing the national REDD+ strategy. The fourth major instance of Colombia's involvement is National Appropriate Mitigation Action. Nationally appropriate mitigation actions are climate change mitigation measures that proposed by developing country governments to reduce emissions below 2020 business as usual levels and to contribute to domestic sustainable development. It was something that became part of UNFCCC and was introduced in the 18th COP. Colombia is one of the developing countries that submitted a NAMA to NAMA registry. Colombia's NAMA submission showed to UNFCCC that it was willing and ready to implement mitigation techniques and make adaptation measures. The last major instance of Colombia involvement is the Climate Change National Adaptation Plan. It reduces risk and socio-economic impact associated to variability and climate change, specifically to raise awareness, manage climate change risk in certain territories, and reduce impact of natural disasters. This is the plan that Colombia submitted to the UNFCCC before the Paris COP to discuss their adaptation plan and effect of climate change on Colombia. Colombia is a country that is severely impacted by climate change. Its many different regions leave it extremely vulnerable to climate change. Its history as a colonized nation means that it does not easily have the resources to combat climate change. These and many other reasons why Colombia is continuously seeking climate change adaptations. It is one of the countries that has most to lose as from climate change because already climate change is wreaking havoc in Colombia, causing flooding, landslides, and change in water provision, impacts on human health, and more. As a result, Colombia will continue to support any reasonable measures to combat climate change.
Colombia is in big trouble, and so we, the Green Health Initiative, have come up with recommendations to help ease their problems. Our first recommendation would be to stick with zero net deforestation with programs such as REDD, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Invest in renewable energy. That'd be our second recommendation. Our third recommendation would be to create a sufficient recycling program. Our fourth, improve agricultural sector, especially livestock conditions. Our fifth, build relations with other countries that are close by to help with reducing pollutions, such as Brazil. And as for the topic of geoengineering, the Green Health Initiative believes that resources are best spent on adaptation and mitigation efforts, as we have no idea how a geoengineering implementation could help or harm Colombia, as research on it is not extensive. However, if independent organizations do want to research it, we encourage it. Most of our recommendations come with cost, and for the REDD, the reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation cost. All in all, it seems it would take around more investment into it would take around $100 million, but it would greatly help Colombia towards zero net deforestation. There were problems with this program before. For example, one indigenous group, the Sukanai, were not able to use trees for wood because of the program, and this hurt them because they live deep in the forest and are heavily dependent upon the trees. However, the solution to that would be the indigenous people should be included in implementation of the policy so as to take into account the effects of policies on the indigenous people population and to respond accordingly. For the renewable energy recommendation, we believe that Colombia should invest $554 million for a span of 15 years, because research estimates that ultimately it would net them a profit of $221 million, and renewable energy is a great way to help reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that goes into the atmosphere. The consequences to that recommendation would be the plan would take time to go into effect and cost money, and Colombia is somewhat dependent upon fossil fuels. However, there are solutions. For example, Colombia is already up to date on renewable energy methods, and so this recommendation would not be the only way it gets energy. Furthermore, money can be gotten from a loan from the UN or from large countries such as the US. As for fossil fuel dependence, since the recommendation would be implemented over a period of time, this means that fossil fuel dependence would go down little by little as more energy is gotten from renewable energy over a period of time. As for our recycling recommendation, according to NAMA, a recycling program would be around $288.5 million. A recycling program would create many jobs in Colombia and reduce methane in the atmosphere from landfills. The consequences to this program would be it is very expensive, and the money that could go into this program could go to helping people suffering from the effect of climate change now. The solution to this would be a loan from the UN or from a rich country like the US, and if this recommendation is implemented, the jobs that would be created could very well pay for the investment in the long term. However, we do recommend that people who are suffering from the effects of climate change now are helped before money goes into this program. For our agriculture recommendation, livestock, specifically bovines, this recommendation would create better cattle production and management, but would cost an estimate of $900 million. It would help reduce methane from cows and lead to less deforestation to make room for cattle, and it would greatly increase income for farmers and decrease their lack of food. The consequences to this recommendation would be it would cost a great deal of money, and some farmers need help now. The solution to that could be a loan from the UN or US or other developed countries. And on the problem of farmers that need help now, the Green Health Initiative feels that resources are first put into making sure the farmers are not in too great of a danger from climate change, and then the recommendation should go into place. Ultimately, the Green Health Initiative believes that most of the costs of these recommendations are worth it considering the massive benefits. As for the idea of forming an organization with other countries nearby, it seems to be one with very little cost, but if there was one, it would be disagreements. However, the benefits of this teamwork would far outweigh the costs. As for the vulnerable population of Colombia, we, the Green Health Initiative, believe that our recommendations help them. For example, women are some of the most vulnerable people. These recommendations would provide them with jobs and more energy to power homes and electronics, so ultimately it would give them a better standard of living. For farmers directly benefit from these recommendations, as better cattle management would lead to more income for farmers and decrease in lack of food. For poor people would also benefit, as more energy means a better standard of living, and more jobs mean they have a better source of income. Indigenous people would be taken into consideration when implementing policies, meaning their voices would be heard. And as for children, children depend mostly on their parents, and so since parents will have more jobs and a better standard of living, so will the children. Ultimately, we believe our plan seems to be the best one for vulnerable populations because it brings justice for many of them. Women's voices would no longer be ignored, and neither would the voice of indigenous people. Farmers and poor people would receive better help for their problems, and children would be able to have a better standard of living which they deserve. These vulnerable people who were in trouble in the past and are in more trouble now due to climate change would see effort going towards solving their problems from our plan.
With higher temperatures, changing landscapes and wildlife habitat, rising seas, increased risk of storms, droughts, and floods, as well as the economic impact, climate change is an issue that cannot be overlooked. We hope our ideas will help Colombia combat climate change to make its environment, economy, politics, and people healthy now and for future generations.